So when I'm walking through Jerusalem and you see, and they say these are the Muslim quarters, this is where the Muslims are allowed to live, that doesn't feel like a bastion of freedom to me.
It's very easy for us, obviously, to make fun of MSNBC and to make fun of the Hamas caucus and everything else. But I'm also noticing another problem in the online pundit class of a series of people who seemingly talk as if they know everything, but really don't know anything related to the history. So I want to show you a clip from Candace Owens' podcast. Personally, look, I do not want to make this about Candace specifically, but Ian, you clipped this and it went viral, and I think people were sort of catching on to something that is a wider problem. So personally, I'm not making this about Candace, but take a look at the confusion here.
When people call it, this bastion of freedom, or it's just like America, it's not the sense that I had when I was there. And again, we had talked earlier on about how our own experiences obviously color our opinions. And I grew up, at my grandparents' house. My grandfather grew up in a segregated South. And so when I'm walking through Jerusalem and you see, and they say these are the Muslim quarters, this is where the Muslims are allowed to live, that doesn't feel like a bastion of freedom to me. So I guess.
Oh, I don't think it's where they're allowed to live in Jerusalem. I think it's that there's an Armenian quarter. It's not saying the Armenians can only live here. It's that there are communities, just like there's a Jewish community in Jersey here, and there's a Muslim community in here. I don't think, to my understanding, it's not restrictions within Israel proper of where Israeli.
I think it is where they have. I mean, at least that's what the rabbi who was taking me around. He said these are the Muslim quarters, so this is where the Muslims
live, but he didn't say anything about legally saying they cannot live on other places within Israel proper. I mean, there's Israeli Arab citizens that have full rights. Israeli Arabs.
I'm only talking about Jerusalem, so I haven't been to Tel Aviv or anything like that. I'm just talking about particularly.
Jerusalem itself as a city has a division in it where the Green Line divides, and there's East Jerusalem. That's maybe what he was talking about, not the Muslim quarter, but East Jerusalem. There's disputed territory within the West Bank and East Jerusalem that divides, and therefore they're under Palestinian Authority or even other jurisdiction. But that's a different conversation as far as what those are. But Arabs within Israel, if you go to Israel, people would be surprised to see on every street sign Hebrew, English, and Arabic. You see a multicultural city. So I'm keep going a little bit because I'm curious in your experience in Jerusalem.
Yeah, no, and maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but I think it's worth talking because my understanding from the rabbi was that this is where the Muslims have to live in Jerusalem, and it looked very different from where the Jewish people were living, and that again, that could not be any fault of any person other than this is how they take care of their stuff, and this is the way that we take care of their stuff. But it was noticeably a lot dirtier. It was noticeably a lot darker, and it just made me feel as a Black American and knowing my own history that this is not, this isn't freedom to me. Like if you can't just decide like I want to live on that street or I want to live on this street, but maybe I'm wrong and it wasn't. Right. They were just all choosing to live there.
It might have been a misunderstanding. Imagine if you went into an inner city in the United States and somebody told you this is a predominantly Black neighborhood and you said it looked more run down. Would you say that America is systemically racist because
if I was giving a tour of it, I wouldn't say this is the Black quarters. Probably.
Or this is a Black neighborhood, but maybe somebody in the group might misunderstand that.
Yeah, maybe I did. Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about that.
All right. So the Candace Owens get it wrong, and if she did, would Candace Owens ever come out and admit that she got it wrong? Probably absolutely not. I've never heard her one time ever admit to being wrong or mistaken about something, unless she's saying she's mistaken about her very liberal and progressive past. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall of that rabbi if he literally said, this is the Muslim quarters and they are not allowed to go anywhere else. They're only allowed to live here. That is legally binding. Or if he simply said, this is the Muslim quarters. I like the example that he brought up, saying like if you went to a really urban city that's mostly Black and you said this is a Black neighborhood, would you now think that the United States is systemically racist? Which is a good thing to say to Candace Owens, because Candace Owens have argued against the fact that the United States is systemically racist many, many times. And she kind of shook her head like, no, I would never say that. I'm pretty sure a lot of people would say that. Like if something is a mostly Hispanic neighborhood, you say this is the Hispanic neighborhood, this is the Black neighborhood, this is where all the Irish people live, this is the Irish neighborhood. People have I've said that. People say that. It is not a racist or thing to say or politically correct. When a majority race lives somewhere or a majority culture lives somewhere, you usually say like, this is this neighborhood, right? It doesn't mean that person not allowed or those communities are not allowed to live anywhere else. Now you can argue that Israel might have something like redlining, like they used to have in the United States, where they make it a lot more difficult for Muslims to live anywhere else but in their neighborhoods, or Armenians or whatever to live anywhere else, or Christians to live anywhere else but in their neighborhoods. They make it really hard if they even try to buy a house or get a loan or a mortgage somewhere else that's outside of their community. Maybe it's not legally binding that they cannot live anywhere else, but they'll make it more difficult for that person to live somewhere else. And the sort of thing that Candace Owens said is like, oh, well, it's dirtier, it's darker. You can say that about communities in urban areas in places like LA. If you go to some urban cities where there's majority Black, if you go to some urban cities where there's majority Hispanic, some of these neighborhoods, majority neighborhoods, some of these neighborhoods can be a little bit more unkept. Is that the fault of the white patriarchy, or is the fault of the community not taking care of it? Now, it could be the fault. Maybe they don't have, the city doesn't invest enough in that community to keep it up, but sometimes a city is not going to invest in a community if the community themselves aren't showing that they're going to keep it up. Like, why should I invest in building a park or a garden in your community when you're just going to destroy it anyway, right? So it's kind of both sides. But I can see the argument that by the city not investing in these communities, they're helping it be more run down, but you also have to like help yourself. So if the rabbi literally just said this is the Muslim quarters and Candace Owens was sort of sprinkling a little extra on there and he just said quarters, I would never get the word quarter, of the definition of that word, to mean you're legally binded to only live in this neighborhood. If someone said this is the Muslim quarter, I would literally just get this is the Muslim community, this is the Muslim neighborhood, this is a lot of Muslims live. And a lot of times people do prefer to live with their kind, especially if they're immigrants and they don't speak a lot of English yet, or they want to still be really steeped into their own culture that they left. A lot of times they would gravitate to their own communities. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm not saying that Candace Owens isn't right about any of this, and that there aren't Muslims, again, like a redlining situation where they're not allowed to go. It's made more difficult for them to branch out of their own neighborhoods, or this is simply where they gravitated to because this is where their culture is. I don't know. I've never been to Jerusalem, but if it's not true, that it's not legally binding, that they are not allowed to go anywhere else but this one area of Jerusalem, if that's not true, then Candace Owens should very much correct herself, because just because she's not a part of the mainstream news media, she speaks with authority, and when you speak of authority comes a lot of accountability to make sure what you're saying is correct. I would never want to be as big as Candace Owens, because I don't feel like, having 7 interns double check everything I'm saying to make sure everything I'm saying is right and to fact check everything I'm saying. And that is but that is her responsibility. So if she's not correct, she should definitely come out and correct herself. But I'm just saying, I don't know for sure. I've never been in Jerusalem. You can on one hand say this is what is on paper, but the lived experience of those people can be completely different. I don't know. But I still think if she's wrong, she should correct herself. But let's continue and see what Dave Rubin and them have to say.
Okay, so again, I don't want to make this specifically about her, but it should be noted that when they talk about Jerusalem, and we were just there 6 months ago, and I said to my guys right before we started, we took a lot of video there, and we'll show something on Monday that explains how these quarters work. Israel didn't create the Muslim quarter and the Jewish quarter and the Armenian quarter and everything else. First off, they largely live in peace. Jews generally don't walk through the Muslim quarter because you might get killed, but anyone can walk through the entrance in West Jerusalem. But the point is, these quarters have existed for thousands of years. It's Israel that has opened up Jerusalem to be an international city that everyone can come to.
Yeah, I think that's a problem with the general commentary class on both sides, is that we have a really a business system in which you just are paid to say things, you're paid to have thoughts. But it gets a little sticky when we're talking about things with very deep consequences, like the deep levels of anti-Semitism we're seeing exploding all over the world based on really a conspiracy theory of anti-Semitism and a conspiracy theory about Israel. And so, for example, comparing Jerusalem to the segregation of Jim Crow era, it's simply not true. I'm not going to talk about, the motivations behind that, because you can't look inside someone's heart. But the fact is that it's not true, but it has very deep and dangerous consequences, because then people will continue to compare modern day Israel to Jim Crow South, to Nazi Germany. And that is the exact propaganda that places like organizations like Hamas and Students for Justice in Palestine and all these other groups are pushing. They're comparing Israel to racist, fascist, apartheid regimes, because that is their entire excuse for all of the violence that they then commit against Jews.
Yeah. If that is true, that these quarters have existed for hundreds of years, you say hundreds or thousands, many years, for many generations, they're already in place, Israel wasn't necessarily the one who created them or whatever, then again, it should be like a correction on Candace Owens' part. But again, it could be the fact that they already existed, and Israel's authority has still made it hard for Muslims to want to move out of the quarters if they want to expand. Israel's made it hard for them to do that, not legally, but kind of hard just to get property, buy property, get a loan, get a mortgage, all those things, get hired in those communities. It could just make it more difficult for them to want to expand if they wanted to. A little bit where he said like people or pundits are paid to say things, or pundits are paid to have commentary. I don't know how deep he was trying to put that, but there's been whispers on the streets where sometimes political pundits push it to certain candidate or lean heavily into certain narratives or ideology, that sometimes people are cutting them a bit fat check. Anywho, let me know what you guys think. I'm not taking sides anyway or anyhow. I'm not there. Things can be in the law, implanted in law, saying everyone has equal rights to move freely wherever they are, but culturally, they can be making it more difficult. But I do believe that for the most part, they probably live harmoniously. I didn't really like that dig that Rubin said, like, well, Jewish people can't go to Muslim communities because they'll probably be killed. And then it kind of like takes away what you just said, they live harmoniously. I think for the most part they do. I think it's the same thing with media that makes it seem like black and white people are constantly at each other's throats, or black and Hispanic people don't like each other or whatever. But you look out your window and for the most part, people do get along. But anyway, let me know what you guys think. I'm running out of battery. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell to get the notifications when I do upload. All that really does help with the algorithm, guys. And please donate. It helps me on this channel. And you guys have a beautiful, amazing day. Bye.
Might have been a misunderstanding. Imagine if you went into an inner city in the United States and somebody told you this is a predominantly black neighborhood and you said it looked more run down. Would you say that America is systemically racist because
if I
of
was
these
giving
cities?
a tour of it,